Alright, we're working on old Leroy here today. We got pulled it out after a long cold winter here in the Northeast, and noticed that the wheel cylinder on the back passenger side was leaking. Now, these brakes I've been wanting to do for quite some time, because when I first got this Jeep back in 2010, I didn't have a really good source for parts. It was before I found a man named Pete DeBella, who has the best parts in the business. And I got some, I don't know whether they're Chinese or what they are, but some kind of garbage brake shoes from somewhere, and they were hard as a rock. Not a very grippy compound, not soft enough to stop the Jeep nicely. And you had to stand on the brakes to get it to stop, and it was a real pain in the ass. And I, at that time, I didn't replace many of the adjusters, and some of them needed some work. And so now we're gonna actually do this thing right, so the brakes work well. So we're gonna take this side off and see what we got. Okay, now we got that apart. Whenever you start with these lug nuts, if your Jeep's original and it's set up the way they were originally, you got left-handed lug nuts on the left-hand side of the Jeep. And they have cuts. The lug nuts have these tiny cuts in them, you can see, to signify that this is a left-handed lug nut. Now you want to make sure you keep this in mind, because if you try to get them off and they're not coming off, it's because you're actually tightening them up. So you want to go the reverse direction to get these off. And some people have changed the studs over the years and put right-handed ones in. Left-handed ones are just not necessary. A couple of these, I got two of these Jeeps, and a couple of the wheels have been replaced, and they have right-handed lug nuts on them, and they don't come loose, so that's not a problem. And then when you take these, when you pull that axle shaft out and you start messing around with these washers or these nuts, you want to keep in mind that this washer that goes in between the nuts, this is a locking washer. So what you're supposed to do is you're supposed to bend part of this up against the flat of the hex on these nuts to keep that outside nut from backing out. Because this outside nut is going to be tight against this washer in the inside nut. It's the very back nut, the one behind the washer, that isn't very tight. You just want to get a little bit of, just a hair of lash on them bushings, so there's, or them bearings, so there's no play in the drum, and then you can tighten this up on top of it. This washer will not spin because it's keyed, and then you can snug this outside one up fairly well. And then, like I said, bend over, tab, or bend over one part of this onto the flat of this nut to keep this nut from walking off. Of course, we're going to clean these bearings out and repack them and put new seals in the drums. And let's get these, let's get the seal out of this drum right now. I want to use brass or copper drift to do this, so you don't damage any surfaces inside there, and you want to make sure you're not getting any chips off of your drift that are going to get down in there. Of course, you're going to clean it out pretty well. You're going to get these bearings, run through some solvent, and make sure they're spun dry. Don't spin them too fast with the air, or they'll come apart. And inspect your bearings and your races, make sure all that looks good. We're just going to give this a little tap. And that brings your seal out. Move your back bearing with it. it's junk. As a side note, one of the things that I thought was so funny whenever I first started messing with these old Jeeps was the fact that the shock absorbers are held over that big stud, or that big cylindrical shaped hunk of rod. The only thing that holds them on is some cotter pins, which works fine. So simple. Alright, so these are the old extremely hard brake pads or brake shoes. The compound that's on them is just awful. And once we get a softer compound shoe on here with the adjusters all adjusted up right, this brake system should work pretty well. Now we're going to take these shoes off, and we're going to take that wheel cylinder out of there. We're going to rebuild these wheel cylinders, and we'll run through all that. A couple special tools you're going to need to do this job. A good pair of brake pliers helps out a lot in getting these springs off. Just makes it a hell of a lot easier to get these springs off, having the right kind of tool to get it done. If you got some pretty strong forearms, you could probably do that with a pair of needle nose vice grips, which, you know, is certainly doable. But we're going to get these anchor nuts off, or anchor bolts off, and these have cams in them, so they adjust. And we're going to take, there's another adjuster behind here that sits against the shoe that adjusts the top of the shoe. We're going to get them off. And the other specialty tool that's required for this job, and it almost is required, especially if you're dealing with brakes that have been on a vehicle for a long time, and your adjusters are golded up, rusted up, and otherwise seized together. Those adjusters, and we'll show you that shortly here, but those adjusters have these tiny little flats on the back of them that require a special wrench. Now this is a Blue Point B351A. It's a Blue Point snap-on wrench, and this is, to my knowledge, the only company that's ever made this. And these are specifically for adjusting the brakes on these old things. And if you notice, they have a very long slot, which makes it so they don't slip off, and they hold incredibly well. When you're dealing with these old adjusters that are all rusted together, this wrench actually has enough power to snap the end of that adjuster right off. And then when that happens, you got to get a small mini pipe wrench with a bar on it for leverage, and get a wrench on the back on the hex on the nut to get it off. This is the only way to hold the front side, but I'll show you that. Before you take this wheel cylinder out of there, you're going to find that it's necessary to remove the bleeder screw because the bleeder screw is actually too big to fit through that hole right there, and it's got a big hex on the backside, so you're going to have to take a bleeder screw clean out in order to get this this wheel cylinder off. So what we're going to do, we're going to inspect these things and see exactly how bad they are. Hopefully they're not too bad. I only did it about 15 years ago, but like I said, the quality wasn't fantastic, and they are a little ugly. But we're gonna run a hone in there and get them all fixed up. Just a little bit of rust, it should be okay. So that's what your stripped down backing plate looks like. The only thing we have to take out yet are these adjusters here, and these you'll notice are eccentric, and they touch the back of the shoe right where that worn spot is right there, to adjust the top of the shoe so there isn't a whole bunch of motion that the shoes have to go through in order to be able to go out and touch the drum. So let's get the right wrench here. It's a 1/4 inch end, I believe. Yes, it is. See the way that, I don't know if you can see that there, the way that cams over and pushes out further as you turn it. But we got to take the nuts off the back of these and get these out of here. This may be a treat. Okay, now these rear wheel cylinders, they only have a 3/4 inch bore, very small. And the way these work is this spring goes in between these pucks inside there. That goes in, and then your cups go in. These are your cups. And then the piston goes in over top of that after you've installed your umbrellas on there. Now, there can be a little bit tricky to get to put together because they are kind of jammed in there with a little finesse and a screwdriver, hopefully a dull screwdriver. You see they're kind of a bitch to get at, but once you get this get these pistons all cleaned up, and we're going to do that with some we're going to try some fine steel wool first, and then we're going to hit them with a brush and some solvent to get any of the crap out of in here so you can get that rubber back in nicely. And we will run something through these. They might not need a hone, but we'll take a quick look in here with a light we got to check the bore and see how clean that bore is once we get it mopped out with some solvent. See if there's any pits or anything messed up inside that bore. I'm not expecting there will be. Looks pretty good. I'll run it through another time or two. And clean up these pistons and we'll be set. Okay, we got these all honed and cleaned up, blowed out, rinsed off, blowed out. And now we're going to put we usually dip these in some brake fluid and we get it down over this kind of like pushing a chain, as my father says. Just give it a little twist to make sure you don't cut the face of it, because it's kind of sharp on that other side over there. There, it snaps down in. It's down there in the shoulder. It's good to go. Spring centered. Plunger in there. Get this back in. Put this down over. There you go. Now there's our rebuilt wheel cylinder. toughest thing about dealing with these is it takes an inordinately small hone to do them. They're only a 3/4 inch bore, and most hones start at 1 inch. And unfortunately, even some of the ones that say that they go down to 3 inch, they actually don't. There's a kit that somebody's selling that has all kinds of different stones and different arms, and it's supposed to go from 3/4 inch with 3 stones all the way up to 2.5 or 3 inch. And the only hone that's in that kit that you can run in here is a 2-stone hone, which is fine, but you don't need all that other stuff, that's for sure. Because 3/4 inch is awful small. And then the front ones are 1 inch. Yeah, that's your rebuilt wheel cylinder. Not much to rebuild them, and the parts are really cheap. But rebuilding them's kind of become a thing of the past. Alright, let me show you what I mean about these. This is everything here. This is all the movable items that make the brakes go. The shoes, of course. Return spring. There's our rebuilt wheel cylinder. And down here you got your anchor bolts with the anchor strap. And the way these work is they got these nifty little, these are bronze. They got anti-seize on them, but these are bronze. And these slip over that funny looking triangular shape shoulder on that bolt. These slip over top of that, and then when these turn, they're sort of a cam action. They have an eccentric on them, and they shove the bottom of these shoes apart or together, depending on how you adjust them. And these are the anchor bolts. This is what a new one looks like. We're going to reuse these old ones because there's nothing wrong with them. They'll be fine. But what I was saying before about the wrench and how this wrench is very important, I'll show you why. If you get a 1/4 inch wrench, like this is all the meat you're going to get. You're like 2/3 of the way onto that thing. This is why you need something with some depth to it to actually give you some torque on that. Because like I said, when these are all golded up and they're old and they're a mess, it's really hard to be able to put any torque on that and have it not just round right off. Because, you know, you can see how short that is on there and how encompassing that is on there. But this is what the new anchor bolts look like. See the cam, the way they're shaped with that eccentric on them, and that's to be able to it contacts the back of the shoe on the back side over here on the inside, and then that allows you to adjust the top, adjust the shoes at the top as far as distance apart goes. Yeah, this is an important wrench for sure, and it is, in case I didn't get it right before, it's a B1351A. B1351A, and that is a blue point number. And the guy who once owned it, his name was Hugo. I don't know if you can see that. But yeah, this is everything, and we're gonna get this all reinstalled on those backing plates, and hopefully we'll have some stopping power. Now your long shoe, there's a long shoe here. You can see the how much shorter pad is. It's riveted to this shoe, and how much longer the pad is riveted to this shoe, and that has to do with the geometry of the brakes, so they wear right, but it also provides much more stopping power with this large shoe in the rear. So make sure you get this longer, the shoe with the longer lining in the rear. This wheel cylinder we rebuilt come out fine. The bore looked good, so we got it new rubbers put in there, spring back in the pistons, and this one will be fine. But on the other side of the axle, this one is not so good. The bore in here, it's really hard to see, but the bore in here is pretty chewed up. a lot of rust and a lot of pitting in it. So this is going to be junk. Can't use that one anymore. So I called up Peter and got some new. I got all new wheel cylinders, and we'll just keep these ones that are actually rebuildable. These that are good cores. We'll keep these around for spares for future, because you know we're hopefully going to live another 20 or 30, 40 years, and we'll need to do this again at some point. But these are the seal tested ones that Peter sells, and they're good quality, totally correct. But we will take them apart, make sure the bores are all good in them, because sometimes the castings aren't great on some of this stuff. But we'll take them apart and check them out before we go ahead and get the stuff remounted and put back together again. Okay, now we're going to get these these brakes put back on here with the adjusters all back in their proper position, and the one big return spring back where it belongs. And then we'll commence to engaging in the exercise of bleeding the brakes, which is always a treat on these old things, because the master cylinder has no elevation above the wheel cylinders. It's almost on the exact same level as the wheel cylinders, because it's down under on the frame rail under the floor. And I usually use a suction type bleeder to aid in that exercise. But yeah, we'll get this stuff put back together here. Okay, now she's all put together. I'm going to make sure you wipe these with some solvent, get any anti-seize off, because you definitely want to have anti-seize these anchor bolts, the straps in between all that stuff, and on the bronze eccentrics that are inside there. You want to make sure that stuff's all lubed in such a way that it's not going to get rust in it, and you're going to be able to adjust these later. I also put a dab of anti-seize inside each one of these, and on the adjusters themselves, not on this side, but on the threads, so everything stays nice, and on the threads of these anchor bolts in the back, so they always turn freely, because these brakes need adjusted from time to time. Now, you always want to make sure you get this big shoe in the back. That's going to give you more stopping power, and it's especially going to be helpful whenever stopping in reverse. I know 61, I think it was, International Travel All, which was like the grandfather to the Suburban, had what they called cannon cylinders on the back brakes. And what a cannon cylinder was is it didn't push both ways. It wasn't two shoes, it only pushed one way, and there was only one shoe in there. And the problem with that is that thing didn't stop worth a damn in reverse. But this thing is, because this shoe is longer than this one, it's supposed to set the geometry in such a way that you get the maximum amount of stopping power against the drum. Okay, but this is all set up and ready to go here. These bolts are snug, they're not tight. We want to make sure these eccentrics are turned, and they are right now. I just turned them. I want to make sure they're turned in such a way that they're in as far as they go, and you want to make sure those top ones are turned in as far as they go. That way, once we get the drum put on here, then we can deal with something you notice on the drum is there's a slot here in the drum, and this slot is specifically for, you can see where that slot comes through right at the surface. That slot is specifically for checking the tolerance between this brake lining and the surface inside the drum. And what you do is, and we'll show you, they put a feelers gauge in there and set by using these eccentrics on the back. You set the position of the shoes inside the drum so they're within a certain tolerance, and we'll have to look to see what that tolerance is. But we're going to get these drums cleaned up. I already drove out the original races because the bearings that were in here were pretty tired. They were marked up, and once you start getting marks in the races and in the rollers themselves, you definitely want to get them out and put new ones in. So we'll get these cleaned up, get new bearings and seals, get the new races pressed in, get the bearings put back in, get the seal put back in, and we'll be able to get this slid back over and get the nuts on her and then adjust the brakes. Okay, now we're going to have to put the new races in here. These are the new bearings. Sometime between, I don't know, 30 years ago and today, bearings just about quadrupled or quintupled in price. Not sure where that's going, but these are the old bearings. They were, one of them was a Bauer, and one of them, possibly really old, I'm not sure. One of them was Timken, just an absolute sweetheart. Numbers are on the outside, made in the USA. You don't see that often anymore. But these bearings, the number of these bearings is a, that's actually the Pete DeBella's number. These are a 1-5, what does that say? 18590 bearing and a 18520 cup. So 18590 bearing and a 18520 cup. But getting from a bearing company just isn't cost effective anymore. Pete has these NSK bearings, which are Japanese, which are probably some of the better bearings you can buy. And he really was about the same price as getting them from a bearing company, even if you own a company and can buy it wholesale like I do. That's why Pete's the best for Jeep parts. And he doesn't sell junk, he knows what works. Okay, so this is cleaned up. We've got this all mopped out with a rag, a little bit of solvent, got it perfectly cleaned up in there. And we're going to put this race in, and the way I usually do this is I do it with the old race. I do it with the fat side in towards the new race to drive it in, and I do that so in case this new race gets down to the point where it's starting to get pressed in because I'm hitting on it, there's a lip there, there's some meat there that you can drive that race back out then from the other side. But just stack up a couple of the old races here. This one you're safe to put it this way. Stack up a couple of the old races here and you can go to town on these. Those races are still loose. Races are still loose. Alright, now is she seated? And she is not. So we kind of have this all the way down as far as we're going to be able to push it with that. So what we're going to have to do then is we're going to have to get a brass drift and put it in the rest of the way. We are in and we are seated all the way down in against the shoulder in there. Would these get stuck if we were using them? No, they still wouldn't. Okay, great. Okay, definitely in against, all the way in against the shoulder. And what we want to do is we want to, after we get done putting both of the races in, we want to go at this again with solvent and get it blowed out really good. Make sure we don't got any chips from our brass stuff down in there, because we do not want that getting in our grease and then subsequently getting into our bearings. All right, so where's our next cup? Let's get it down in here. This is going to try to press itself in immediately. This is starting to get a little jammed up. So we're going to have to put it in the rest of the way with a drift. Are we seated? That's the question. Looks to be pretty close anyways. Sounds to be. Sounds totally solid now. All right, let's take a gander in there. Yep. Get your fingernail in. Make sure it's pressed on all the way against that shoulder, and it appears to be. I don't know if you can see how chewed up this is inside this end from guys not having the proper tools and using chisels and screwdrivers to get the nuts and the washers off. Kind of funny. All right, these are the old bearings. These are the new ones. I don't want to do nothing with them yet until we get this solvent washed and blowed out and dried out really good with high pressure air. And then we'll get our seal in there after we get our bearings packed and put in, and we'll be ready to slip that back on and get the nuts on her. I bought that nifty little device many years ago, and I've used it for packing bearings, but I just prefer the old method of packing them by hand, where you get a palm full of grease and you sit here and you smash this bearing round and round and round until you see the grease oozing out of the top. That way you know you got it completely packed. Give it a wipe around and drop it inside your hub, and you're ready to go. So let me get these bearings packed with grease. Now to put in the seal, and you always want to put seals in with the spring side towards what you're sealing up. In other words, the spring side towards the bearings and the grease. You can see a tiny little spring inside there in the edge of that seal. Maybe you can see that. But but this lip, this tapered lip, goes towards whatever you're putting it on, so the shaft can slide in here easily, and then that double lip keeps it sealed pretty well. And we're gonna drive this in. I'm gonna get this seal driven in there. We'll see how tight it fits. These hubs are originals and they are worn, but they still should be within a spec for workable. Now you're supposed to be able to just drive these seals in, and that may be all well and good for most applications, but because this old stuff is so chewed up, I prefer to just put a light smattering of this. This is Permatex 80019, and I use it a lot on these old vehicles because stuff is just so beat up. The sealing surfaces aren't great, and this stuff can help that seal to be actually sealed on this outside edge. Maybe a little bit overkill, but do it anyways. Okay, these are ready to slip back on, so let's do that. All right, now we got our parts, our ducks in a row here. We want to get a little bit of get a little bit of grease on this surface back here. Just to lube that seal up for popping over there. I'm going to keep the majority of it on the shaft itself. Okay. Bring it up, put it on. Be careful you don't touch the threads to that sealing surface. You don't want to chew that seal up at all. I'm gonna hold that here. First thing it has to go in is a bearing. Get it in over top of that, those threads. Make sure it's all the way in there, and it is. Take your hand away, and next thing that goes in is this keeper, this washer. Make sure everything has grease on it. You don't want to leave anything with that grease on it. There's the key in here. It slips right in on the key. Now that's going to keep the nut from contacting the bearing. Now we need the nut. turn while you get that nut tightened up. You want to make sure that everything is seated in where it's supposed to be. So we use this socket that we have here. And everything seems to be doing pretty good here. No play and nothing. What I usually do is I give this a little bit of a tight job and then back it off. Just to make sure everything is down, seated where it should be. Let me give that a little, back it off of here. Absolutely no lash here. Got a little bit of play in her. So we're going to tighten it up until we remove that play. Play's gone. I'm going to give it just a little more snug. So we just have just a hair of lash on those bearings. Okay, now we need to put our locking ring in. Making sure we got grease on all our components and pieces and parts. Get that tang out in the right direction there. Now what this washer is going to do is it's going to serve two purposes. It's going to keep our tension that we have on the bearings right now with that inner nut. It's going to keep that nut from turning. So we can tighten this outside one up pretty tight and not risk changing the amount of lash on the bearings. Everything's nice and coated. Sometimes these are tough to get started. Alright, and seated down against. Going to give a good tight job on this outer nut. I like that. We're not going to make it too over tight. Seems to change the lash setup there. And then we're going to need a screwdriver and pull that tab up. Pull this tab up in here. Okay, we got our tab bent up. That washer, just bent one of the parts of the washer up between on the flats there so that nut can't turn. And we are golden. We are good to go. And that's also one of the reasons why this gets chewed up here over the course of 80 years from having to do just that. Make sure that's all the way in. we can get it. Yeah, that nut cannot back off now. Okay, now we need to get our axle shaft back over here. Get our axle shaft put back where it belongs. And this is our long side shaft. And we cleaned all these holes out with a brush and high pressure on the air blowgun, so they're nice and clean. Don't try to chase these unless you absolutely have to, because this outer part here is rather small, and a tap doesn't want to get started in there properly, and you can mess this hub up, and you do not want to mess this hub up. So as long as you've got enough thread depth and no junk stuck down in the holes, probably take a skinny dental pick with a straight edge and wiggle around in there, make sure there's no junk down in there, because these bolts are fairly long. Once they go through the axle shaft, they still got an inch and a quarter at least it goes into that hole. So we'll get these bolts cleaned up, and the residual sealant that's left on them, we'll run them on a wire wheel and get these nice and clean and put that shaft in. I always use this black RTV whenever I'm sealing stuff up, because, you know, like I said, these old surfaces, they're not perfect. They're nicked up, scarred up, scratched up, and it's good to take a file to them, get any of the high spots down, but they're still a mess. So you kind of have to use this stuff if you want stuff to not leak or seep. You'll notice when I put the axle shaft in, I actually had it indexed incorrectly. These two 3/8 threaded holes are, you can put bolts in there and actually pop this off in case your gasket is stuck on there and it's got the shaft stuck in there. That's pretty much it. We're going to put a little bit of paint on this later on, so it should be good to go for now. Then the next thing is going to be adjusting the brakes. There's a few videos on YouTube for brake adjustments, so I'm not going to really go over that too much because I got to crawl underneath there to do it, and without a tub on it's a little easier to do that video. Yeah, that's pretty much it. 37.5 foot-pounds is what almost every damn thing is on these old vehicles. At least that's what the Army manual says, although I kind of have my doubts with some of the studs or bolts if they're torqued to that low of a torque. But I just kind of snug them up, you know. I don't break them off. And don't forget, when you're dealing with this side of the Jeep, your lug nuts are reverse thread. So what you normally think is tightening them up is actually loosening them up, and vice versa. But that's about it as far as getting the drum off and doing brake work. Now, if you have to separate this drum from the hub, that requires about a $125 swage cutting tool to be able to cut the back of that drum. I can show you that. These front of the drum rather. These drums, when they're put together at the factory, or when they were put together at the factory 80 years ago, they take this drum, set this hub down on it, flip it upside down, and then they press these studs in But they also have this machine that would come down and smash this little shoulder that was sticking up on here, smash it down so this thing is actually all put together as one piece basically. And what that swage cutter does is it's a tiny hole saw, and it goes over top of these studs without touching the studs, and just cuts away just that little bit of material so these can be separated. Somebody, I believe, is going to start, or maybe has already started, or is going to start, what I heard anyways, making replacement drums that actually have a hub already on them, so you don't got to worry about dealing with that. But these drums are good. They're not worn bad at all, and they're round, so we're in good shape there. But that's about it, I think.